What have you been interested in recently? You're always learning new stuff.
Yeah, I think most recently I've had a real interest in ultra-processed foods, in plastic, microplastics, their associated chemicals, what they're doing to human health. That's been my latest obsession.
Okay, microplastics. Teach me about them. What are they? What do they do?
So microplastics, I mean, we're all familiar with plastic. If you take a look in your refrigerator or your pantry, I mean, almost everything is packaged in some kind of plastic container. Plastic breaks down over time, right? So things that can accelerate that breakdown would be like heat, exposure to oxygen. And so that breakdown sheds plastic particles into whatever is being contained in that plastic container, food, beverages, whatever. So microplastics, they sort of vary in size anywhere between 5 microns or micromillimeters to 100 nanometers in size. And when they're like 5 micromillimeters, that's like something that would be equivalent to a size of like a grain of rice. You can see it. When you get down to the 100 nanometer range, I mean, that's like 1,000 times smaller than a grain of rice. So you're not going to see it, right? And that's, honestly, those are actually technically nanoplastics, but we all just kind of call them microplastics just for simplicity. And these microplastics are getting into food as we consume whatever food they're contained in, whether it's a beverage or, disposable food. You're digesting it and they can be absorbed, right? Now, not all of them are absorbed. I think there's some studies saying that we basically consume anywhere between hundreds to thousands of particles a day. So how much of that we absorb? Not all of it, fraction of it. Mm-hmm. But it's a lot of particles that we're absorbing every day. And these microplastics are in our water. So water is contaminated with them. If you think about water treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants are treating the water for pathogens, right? Viruses, bacteria. They're not treating them for plastics that are getting into the water. And our water sources are contaminated for a variety of reasons, not to mention if you're turning on your faucet and getting water through the sink, oftentimes the water's transported through these pipes that are made of, PVC, which breaks down. There's plastic in that, and it breaks down over time and sheds microplastic into your water. So water is another source. Of course, if you're drinking bottled water out of plastic bottles, that's another added source of microplastics as well. And so microplastics themselves are, there's a growing body of evidence in terms of what they're doing to human health, and we can talk about that. But there's also chemicals that are associated with them, right?
How prevalent are these things? Like, how difficult is it to avoid microplastics?
It's impossible to avoid. I mean, the fact that it's in our water source is kind of indicative of that. Unfortunately, it's not just in our water, but it's in our soil. So plants are taking that up. It's in
How's it
sludge.
Getting into the soil?
Because it's essentially, runoff from rain and stuff. It's in microplastics and plastic chemicals are everywhere. So they're in the air. And so when rain,
So they're so small that they can go up with precipitation?
They're in the air because the main source from the air is actually our clothing. So our clothing, polyester, nylon, like the stuff that I'm wearing for sure. I'm not wearing 100% cotton. When you wash it, it gets, into the oceans. When you dry your clothes, the dryer is,
killing me.
It's
The
putting
dryer
microplastics
is atomizing your microplastics and pushing them into the atmosphere.
into the air. And tires are a big source. So tires aren't 100% made of rubber. They're rubber and a bunch of plastic, stuff. And so cars on the road, shoes on our, the rubber shoe soles on our shoes, all that stuff has plastic, and all that stuff is getting into the air. So the major source of microplastics are oral ingestion, which we talked about, and then inhalation. That's how they're getting into our bodies. So when it rains, that stuff, the rain brings the microplastics into our runoff, right? And that then gets into the soil. It gets into our sludge. This is like fertilizer that's used. So it's pretty much ubiquitous. It's everywhere. You're not going to avoid it. Not to mention, I mean, I guess even if you were to try and not consume any condiments or foods or anything like that made out of plastic, you're going to do a huge service. You're going to greatly reduce the amount of microplastics you're consuming. Let's say you have air filters, you're trying to filter the air, but you're not going to filter it everywhere you go, right? You're in your car, you're walking around on the street, especially if you live in a metropolitan urban area. It's very, very difficult to eliminate microplastics.
What's the sort of levels that we get exposed to? How much does that get down into being absorbed? Because the Earth's a big place. It feels to me like the atmosphere's got loads of room in it. I don't know how much of the air that we get exposed to, even in downtown New York, is going to be filled with microplastics. I'm going to guess that there's, on the triage list of stuff to worry about, there's probably other stuff up there, carbon monoxide, high levels of carbon dioxide, stuff like that might be a problem. But yeah, like in terms of how we get exposed to them, what are the sort of levels that we get exposed to? What do we absorb?
So it does depend on, of course, your lifestyle. So it depends on what you're eating, what you're consuming, where you live, how polluted it is, right? Like that's obviously, if you have air filters in your home, which is a big one. If your dryer, you don't want your dryer to ventilate inside of your home. That would be like a huge source of microplastics that are concentrated inside your house. So you want it to ventilate, of course, outside, of course, but then that contributes to the microplastics in the environment, right? Which ultimately makes its way back into our food and our, the air we breathe outside. But there's a lot of studies trying to quantify how much microplastics that we are taking in daily. And there's been a variety of studies, and some of them have said, well, there's a credit card of plastic a day that we consume. And that was a very, I would say, sensational headline that was it was published in a peer-reviewed study. But it turns out when you're trying to really quantify the gram weight of microplastics, it's very challenging because they vary in size. I mentioned 5 micrometers to like 100 nanometer in size. And so it depends on what your source of microplastics are when you're trying to quantify that. And so a lot of studies that have looked at some of these, in gram weight, how much are we consuming, used microplastics that are found in the oceans. So in the oceans, a lot of that's coming from our clothing, runoff from our washing our clothes. And it's not necessarily the same size particles that we're consuming if we're drinking water from a tap, or we're eating, or we're drinking water out of a bottled water made of plastic. So it's not really a credit card in plastic. That really isn't, I would say, accurate. Again, it comes down to, it could be thousands of particles a day. Absorbing wise, there have been studies in animals, okay, not humans, that showed that animals absorb up to 2.5% of those particles. There are a variety of factors that actually can help you blunt that absorption. So microplastics, really the major one is size. So as you get smaller in size, like nanoplastics, those can be more readily absorbed through your intestinal cells because of the size. It's really easy for them to kind of pass the membrane of your cell.
I'm going to guess that if you've got a leaky gut of some kind, or you've got a more permeable gut wall, is that a risk factor for this?
It is, yeah. Presumably. I mean, there's not a ton of evidence on that, but it makes sense. The question is, I mentioned heat breaking down the microplastics. Well, heat can break them down into nanoplastic size. So you don't want to microwave any food in plastic. You don't want to cook with any plastic utensils, and you don't want to drink out of something that's going to have a hot beverage poured into it, because that's going to rapidly, accelerate the breakdown into smaller particles. So, for example, a lot of to-go coffee cups are lined with plastic to prevent the leaching of the beverage into the cup, the paper cup. And so when you pour hot water into that, you can rapidly break down those, plastics into small size as well as chemicals. So
you think maybe up to 2.5% of what we consume per day we might absorb?
Well, that's from animal studies. So who knows? Something like in that range. But the other thing that's really interesting that actually can affect the way you absorb these microplastics is, believe it or not, dietary fiber. Because there's 2 types of fiber. There's fermentable fiber. This is what the bacteria in the distal part of your gut, this is the colon, they're fermenting into a bunch of short chain fatty acids to regulate your immune system and do all sorts of beneficial things for your gut. Then there's also non-fermentable fiber. This just moves stuff through your intestines, right? Well, the fermentable fiber, which is found in fruits and vegetables, that is fermented into like this viscous gel that encapsulates microplastics and nanoplastics and stops them from being absorbed. The non-fermentable fiber, just like the stuff that moves, foods through your intestines, also just moves the microplastics as well. So you're going to be excreting it through feces more rapidly. So those are two ways that fiber actually is beneficial for basically inhibiting the absorption of microplastics and nanoplastics.
Where do plastics go in the body? Do they congeal in certain places?
Yeah. So there's been, again, this is like an emerging field. There's a lot more evidence on the chemicals associated with plastics, which we can talk about. But there's been a variety of studies, actually a lot of them coming out in 2024 last year, some new ones coming out this year, showing that microplastics seem to accumulate in the brain 10 to 20 times more than other organs. And this was a study out of São Paulo, Brazil, where there's moderate air pollution. I mean, it's not like Mexico City, but there's a significant amount of air pollution there. And I mention air pollution because you would think, well, why are microplastics accumulating 10 to 20 times more rapidly in the brain than other organs? They've been found in the heart, they've been found in the liver, and the kidneys, and the lungs. Of course, you're breathing it in the testes, reproductive organs, everywhere, placenta. But why are they accumulating so heavily in the brain? And it's not really known. It hasn't really been investigated, but I think it has to do with the fact that we're breathing in these particles in addition to consuming them orally from our foods and beverages and things like that. Because I mentioned microplastics are in the air, right? They're in the air. We are breathing them in. They get into our lungs. But so the blood-brain barrier is supposed to protect chemicals from getting into the brain. And you would think, well, if anything,
do your job.
Yeah, you'd think it'd be like less microplastics in the brain than in the lungs, right? And also particle size plays a role. So again, particle size, if you have a nanoplastic, it can more readily transverse across the blood-brain barrier because it's smaller in size, similar to what's happening in the gut. But when you breathe in something, it's a direct route to the brain. So it bypasses the blood-brain barrier. And this is because your olfactory neurons, when you smell something, there's a direct connection to the central nervous system. And this is why a lot of drugs that are administered intranasally are done so, because they are trying to bypass the blood-brain barrier. So I think what's happening is you're getting a combination of both oral consumption and you're getting the nanoplastics, in circulation. Because once these things get into circulation, there's really no point it's kind of beyond the point of return, right? They're going to organs and they're accumulating there. Like, I don't know how they're going to get out of the organs once they're there. This isn't something that we're excreting unless it's at the level of the intestines when we're eating it, consuming it. Then, like I mentioned, if the fiber is there, you're excreting it. But once it gets into circulation, it's going to organs. So I think the combination of, the breathing it in and eating it is why you're getting it in the brain 10 to 20 times more. And here's why that's a problem. Because in that same study, they looked postmortem at people that had dementia, like Alzheimer's disease. And those individuals that had dementia and Alzheimer's disease had 10 times more microplastics in their brains than people that did not have dementia and Alzheimer's disease. 10 times more. So, of course, this is a correlation. You can't necessarily say this is causing it, right? Microplastics are causing Alzheimer's disease. But there are animal studies that have shown that microplastics in the brain can cause inflammation, chronic inflammation. And we do know that plays a big role in brain aging, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease.
I wonder if you would be able to run a study where you had people who, for one reason or another, were breathing in cleaner air but were still eating the same sort of diet compared with people eating the same sort of diet but breathing in less clean air. So people that maybe lived out in the countryside but were still eating food that was wrapped in plastic. So you have that, which is the systemic through the mouth one, but then you also have the sniffing a line of plastic from your daily breathing equivalent that's coming from the people that live in cosmopolitan, metropolitan cities, something like that. That'd be really interesting to try and split that out. I guess, well, you mentioned before the sort of types of plastics that we're talking about. I've heard about, what have I heard about? BPAs, heard about those. What else? Are we worried about BPAs anymore? Or is that like...
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So the bisphenol A is a chemical that is put into plastic. It's a chemical that's it helps with durability, robustness, flexibility, right? So those chemicals would be bisphenol A, BPA. Phthalates are another one. Then there's BPS, which is the replacement for BPA. So you'll often hear BPA free. And
it's just got BPF or BPS in instead.
It's got BPS.
It's the delta 8 equivalent of getting around the weed law. It's like, this isn't cannabis. This is delta 8. You go, well, I mean, functionally it does the same thing, but you've just changed some molecule that means that legally it's not an issue.
Exactly. It's essentially a good marketing strategy because people, I have many friends that thought BPA free was like, oh, this is healthy, but you have to realize, no, there's still plastic. Like you can put hot water into a BPA free mug that has plastic in it, and you're still going to get microplastics, and you're still going to have the other chemicals like BPS. So these chemicals are called endocrine disrupting chemicals because they disrupt the endocrine system. And so BPA, BPS, these are chemicals that are often referred to as xenoestrogens because they mimic estrogen in the body. And they bind to estrogen receptors, they bind to androgen receptors, and they can block the activity of them or they can enhance the activity depending on the dose of the chemical. And so that has a lot of effects on hormones. So there have been a variety of studies looking at how BPA, BPS, there's fewer studies on BPS because it's newer, but it seems as though it's doing something very similar to BPA.
What about BHT? I've heard about that.
I don't know as much about BHT.
I think this was the thing that Vani Hari popped Kellogg's for having on the inner lining of their America cereal bags, that they didn't have this particular BHT in the Canadian version. The same, they didn't have the red 40, they didn't have the blue 3, they didn't have the yellow 4, and they didn't have this particular type of plastic additive that was on the inside. Helps with preservation of the food, makes it last longer, does something else. Maybe it's cheaper, I'm not too sure. So who are the big culprits? What are the big ones?
BPA is one of the biggest ones. BPS is now, coming along because there's a lot of companies that are manufacturing and marketing BPA-free. Phthalates are a big one. Those are also found in a lot of like personal hygiene products and cosmetics, shampoos, deodorants, creams, everything, like anything personal hygiene. And then there's also the forever chemicals, PFAS. Those are also found in a variety of things that are water resistant, oil repellent, anything like that. So these chemicals. So I mentioned hormones. They're disrupting testosterone. So there's been a variety of studies looking at, for example, urinary BPA exposure and testosterone levels, and there's an association with higher urinary BPA exposure, higher urinary BPA, excretion, and lower testosterone. Again, because these things are affecting, they're affecting hormones through feedback loops because they're binding to these estrogen receptors, these androgen receptors. And this is something that microplastics themselves are, leaching in. So if you have microplastics accumulating in your testes, for example, there was a study, it was a small study, it was done that found 100% of people, and they also tested dogs. 100% of both people and dogs had microplastics in their semen. Like not a single sample that didn't have microplastics in semen. And this was also associated with disrupted morphology, so the structure of sperm, and also motility, so the ability to move and swim, right? So this stuff is sort of fundamental, right? It's affecting our reproduction. It's kind of, and it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. So it's not something to ignore. There's obviously a lot of other lifestyle factors that are important, being, maintaining a healthy weight and exercise and all that. But I do think this is a growing issue. It's affecting hormones. BPA is also affecting the brain. So a lot of studies on brain development, but also like studies looking at, just correlations between high BPA levels in adults. neurodevelopment is a big one because developing, fetuses like males that are developing, boys that are developing, it's affecting their neurodevelopment. So women that have higher urinary BPA levels are 6 times more likely to have a child diagnosed with autism. And also it's affecting the sexual development of boys. So
the AGD is getting impacted, right?
Yes, exactly. So it's both the anogenital distance, so that would be the distance between the anus and the penis, right?
Glad that you said it.
And so that's shorter, right? These plastic chemicals like phthalates in particular is a big one. Also BPA is affecting the anogenital distance, but it's also affecting phthalates in particular are affecting undescended testicles is a big one. I mean, it's really common now if you talk to like parents, like how common it is to have a boy with an undescended testicle, and also hypospadia. So that is the in boys, it's the urethra slit where urine comes out of. It's like further back on the penis, and so it's basically some boys have to
warping the
sit.
entire physiology.
Yeah, so your stream isn't normal, right? You might have to sit down to urinate because the slit is like further back on the penis. This is a big thing that phthalates it's affecting sexual development because these hormones are really important. They're signaling during development how organs.
You're a male, you're a female.
Exactly, they are, and so this is a. I think it's a growing problem. I think we have enough evidence now to be alarmed about it. There should be some conversations about it because, it's not like we're going to have a randomized controlled trial where you're going to give a pregnant woman BPA and phthalates, right? That's unethical. So you're never going to have that gold standard. We're going to have to look at this observational data, which at the end of the day is, of course, always correlation, but there's a lot of it. And there's a lot of animal data showing causation in animals, showing how it's happening. And we have to kind of connect the dots and say, look, like this is something we need to be concerned about. These chemicals are affecting human development, and they're affecting adults. They're affecting cognition. It's
How
not,
so? What's the impact of plastic on cognition?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's correlation, but there have been studies looking at high BPA levels. Again, it's always urinary because we excrete BPA through our urine. That's how we detoxify it. And so high urinary BPA levels is associated with, decreased cognition, decreased memory scores, decreased learning. So again, correlation, because you could say, well, people are consuming packaged foods, which are ultra processed, and that also is associated with poor cognition.
Is it what they're consuming or is it what they're consuming is contained within?
Right. But we do know that BPA can cross the blood-brain barrier. It can disrupt neuronal signaling. Again, when you look at the animal data and you have a mechanism that's very plausible there, you start to connect the dots and go, wow, there's plausibility here. We can understand what it's doing. We have human data that's correlating it. So, we need to start to think about these things. Like there's only so much that you can, that you can do without, of course, being unethical and designing an experiment, right?
We just learned about the way that microplastics are making their way into our bodies. Yet another reason why staying on top of your health is vital, which is why I partnered with Function. They run lab tests twice a year that monitor over 100 biomarkers and monitor for early signs of thousands of diseases. They even screen for 50 types of cancer at stage 1, which is 5 times more data than you get from your annual physical. You receive insights from a team of expert physicians who provide detailed notes of their observations and phone consultations for any critical findings. Getting these lab tests done would usually cost thousands, but with Function, it is only $500. Right now, you can get the exact same blood panels that I get by going to the link in the description below or heading to functionhealth.com/modernwisdom. That's functionhealth.com/modernwisdom. Is there a sex difference between how men and how women are susceptible to plastics? Are certain types of plastics more? Are they making different kinds of impacts? And obviously, women can be pregnant, so I guess developing children in the womb, that's one thing. But yeah, what's the sex difference story?
It does seem like males tend to be more susceptible.
God damn it. I knew it. I knew it.
Males in general, like during development, they seem to be more vulnerable to a lot of different environmental stresses, including like acetaminophen. And there's all kinds of studies where you'll find, oh, this is happening in a male, fetus, like a male that's developing, not the female.
Female privilege. Okay, go on.
But yeah, again, we mentioned all these reproductive effects in men, right? It's and also autism affects. I mean, men are twice as likely, or boys are twice as likely to be diagnosed with autism than girls.
So 12 times more likely if you've got a ton of microplastics in you.
I don't know that yet. I'm not sure about that. But I mean, yeah.
I also don't do maths very well. But anyway, yeah, it is. It's. I mean, what is it? What's the saying? Males are nature's playthings. That there's just more male variability. There's more male variability in terms of IQ, in terms of height, in terms of all of these different things. And every fetus starts off as female as well, right?
I think there's some kind of sex. I mean, first of all, the sex is determined by the male side, so the sperm, right? And I'm not exactly sure that I would say it starts off as female, but like it depends on what you're defining.
Is this not the reason why men have got nipples? You need to have all of the individual bit. Like, this is where we need to go. I'm pretty sure. Someone chat GPT it and tell me whether or not I'm right. I feel like I might be right here. But okay, sex differences. How does it impact men and women differently?
And it also goes with, like, a lot of these plastic chemicals like BPA are also affecting ADHD, not just autism. And again, it seems like boys are more susceptible to that. But these plastic chemicals do affect women as well. It's also something that's affecting fertility. It's affecting egg. So there's been studies on in vitro fertilization, and women that have high levels of BPA, they have like 50% less viable eggs. So it's not like these plastic chemicals aren't affecting women as well.
Wow.
And cognition in general, I mean, it's affecting both sexes, right? It's not just men. But it seems as though, like, sexual development really, it seems to be targeting males, especially the phthalates.
What about testosterone levels, energy production, stuff like that?
So testosterone levels, as I mentioned, there seems to be, because you've got BPA and some of the other chemicals, they are endocrine disrupting. They are binding to estrogen receptors. They are binding to androgen receptors. It depending on the dose, this will affect, the hormones that are signaling to the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, right? The HPG axis, where testosterone is produced. And so ultimately what happens is there's like these feedback loops that are important in order to make hormones like testosterone. And so that gets disrupted, and then the HPG axis is disrupted, and so you don't make as much testosterone. Again, a lot of this has been worked out in animal studies. When you look at the human data, it's okay, men with higher levels of BPA also have lower levels of testosterone. So the question is, okay, well, what can we do about it, right? Like, you want to try to avoid some of these plastic chemicals.
Well, let's actually, before we get into that, you've sort of touched on them a few times, but just do a rundown for me of the most common places that people are getting exposed to the highest levels of microplastics.
Yeah. So the most, I would say, common places, one is drinking out of bottled water, like bottled plastic bottles, right? Like, a lot of people drink out of plastic bottles. That would be a big source. Tap water that's unfiltered. So tap water, again, also has microplastics. Unfortunately, our oceans are contaminated, so microplastics are also found in a lot of fish, and particularly they accumulate in the digestive tract of fish. So if you're eating shellfish or clams or oysters or anything where you're eating the whole digestive tract, or a sardine, whole sardine, then you're going to be getting microplastics. Heat is a big one, okay? I would say that is one of the main, culprits when you're combining that with plastic. So a lot of your to-go coffees that you're drinking from
Starbucks, yep.
Anything like that is a huge one, because you're there's been studies looking at BPA leaching into liquid when heat, like boiling water, is applied. It increases the leaching by 55 times, which is huge. It also increases microplastic, breakdown, right? Because you're breaking down the plastic itself.
Not only are you getting more, you're making the plastic smaller, which allows it to be permeating through the gut more effectively.
Exactly. I can't tell you how many, like, to-go coffees I've had in my life. And, another big source now, this is like new coming out. I mean, there's been a couple of studies that have come out on this, is tea bags. Because you're adding hot water to tea, and the tea bags themselves are made of either polypropylene, they're made of nylon, or they're made of, interestingly, cellulose, which you would think wouldn't have microplastics, but I think they must be mixed. There must be a mixture of stuff in there. And there's this new study came out, really just a couple of months ago, showing that you can get anywhere between millions to billions of microplastic particles per milliliter. Per milliliter.
How much is that compared with the normal sort of, that's a large dose?
It's a lot.
Okay.
It's a lot. What I'm getting at is, there's not that. I think what's happening is the heat is breaking the plastic down. These tea bags are made of plastic. And so, consuming these tea bags, again, when you're getting to-go tea, it's like, I'm like, all I can think about is like, I'm consuming a plastic tea.
Yeah.
But you have to remember, there's a lot of studies, at least with green tea, showing that green tea has huge benefits for cognition. It delays dementia.
It might even offset the microplastics you've had to consume.
Yeah. So, clearly people are drinking tea out of probably tea bags. So it's not like, at least with green tea, it seems like there's some benefits. Right. Yeah. But so those are some of the major sources. And then there's also, it's in our salt. And then air. Right. So like that's another one if you're living in a polluted place, if you're, again,
internally venting your
dryer ventilation in your house. That's another major source. And then another one would be also to consider would be black plastic. So I know you're like, what? This is kind of some new data coming out. Black plastic is often made from recycled electronics. And
you mean bits of plastic that are black?
I mean black utensils like your black spatula or black plastic, forks and knives, or your black plastic lid on a to-go coffee cup, black sushi, the bottom of a sushi container, bottom of like a rotisserie chicken. If you've ever bought a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store, that black, right? Black plastic. It's often made from recycled electronics, and recycled electronics often have chemicals in them that are added to prevent fires from starting. Like, they don't want electronics starting fires. So they add these brominated flame retardants, which are carcinogenic. They are not supposed to be in food. You don't suck on your electronic. They're not supposed to go in your mouth, right? So these black plastics have very high levels of carcinogens that are normally not even found in regular plastics that we're, in things that we're consuming. And there was a study out of the University of Plymouth that found black utensils, black toys for babies, they're putting in their mouth. They contain between 30 to 40 times the safe limit of these brominated flame retardants and other carcinogens and endocrine disruptors in them than safe. So that's another sort of, and think about it, if you're buying like a rotisserie chicken, or like you get a to-go pho or whatever soup, and it's in like a black container, you got the heat. That's the added factor on top of that, right? So that's another major source.
What about dermal stuff?
Yes. So again, we mentioned the phthalates, right? Which are in personal hygiene products. And that's something I do want to mention, because you might think, oh, I'm looking at the ingredient list and there's no phthalate on there. But there's two different chemicals that are very, very sneaky, because they mean there's phthalates, and they're in a lot of personal hygiene products. One is fragrance. If the word fragrance is in the ingredients list, that means there's phthalates. And parfum, not perfume, but parfum. That is another chemical that means there's phthalates. So you really want to look for phthalate-free personal hygiene products. Again, very important, especially for people that are considering conceiving, because those are the chemicals that are associated with the sexual, disrupting sexual development in boys. And then the other one is receipts. And this is a really big one, because maybe not for you and I, right? Receipts they're thermal paper. And so essentially they're coated with BPA, because there's a thermal reaction that happens when heat is applied to the BPA. It prints it prints text on the receipt without actual ink.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it works. And if you ever see like a white coating on the receipt, like that's BPA. So the BPA in like plastics, at least it's kind of contained in a plastic matrix. Like this is just
It's purposefully liberated. Yes.
exactly. It's like free for all on the receipt. And so there's studies looking at people that handle a lot of receipts. Like when I was in the
Check
airport,
out stuff and stuff like
yeah,
that.
I was in the airport on coming here, and the guy that was like handling the receipt, he's like, "Do you want the receipt?" I'm like, "No." And I saw him take it out and put it in the trash. And like, I thought about, there's this huge line of people.
You're doing
It's
that
a coffee
500
shop.
times a day.
Exactly. And I looked at the guy and I was like, "Hey, dude, I just want to tell you that these receipts are lined with endocrine disruptors that disrupt hormones." And he goes, "You mean?"
Wish somebody had recorded this. Oh my God. This lady who's going through the airport. I met this lady earlier on today and she started ranting and raving about the receipts. She said it's sort of covered in this magic dust that's killing me or something. Like
I couldn't help myself. I felt like I couldn't not say something, right? And he looks at me and goes, "You mean like testosterone?" I was like, "Yes, testosterone. It's been correlated with a decrease in testosterone." I was like, "You need to wear nitrile gloves." So bottom line is BPA, it's lined on the receipts. Nitrile gloves can stop people from absorbing it. So people that are like, basically any kind of cashier, anyone that's handling a receipt multiple times a day, highly recommend they wear nitrile gloves. Latex doesn't do that. Also, if you wear cream or hand sanitizer, it's been shown to increase the dermal absorption of BPA by 100-fold.
Fuck off. So people are like, I don't want to get
Germs.
my hands on the
I don't want to get COVID or whatever, right? How many
100x.
100x absorption. Think about how many times I've seen them do it, and then they touch the receipt. So I think this is like something that is not really talked about. And here I am worried about my like one-time exposure. So, for people out there, it's like, yeah, you can opt for no
2-decade
receipt.
career of working in Target or something like that. So the first time that I ever learned about receipts, you won't know who this is, but Owen Schroyer, who is Alex Jones's sort of second in command. I went for dinner with him when I first moved to Austin like forever ago. It was him and a bunch of other people. There was a couple of girls at the table with us as well, just downtown in Austin. And the receipt came out and I was like, "Oh, I'm sort of new here. I'll get the meal. That'd be like nice. It'd be a nice thing for me to do." So I did it. And as I'm going to get the receipt out, one of the girls that sat around the table like hits my hand away. I'm like, "What?" She's like, "What are you doing?" As if I was about to walk out into open traffic. I'm like, I was going to take the receipt and I was going to put the tip on. She was like, "Are you crazy? You're going to touch that?" I'm like, so it kind of does show that the fringe insight from 3 years ago, some of that stuff ends up being a bullseye and sort of percolates around. Now, I'm not saying that all of it is, but some of the stuff ends up being legit.
Right. It is. It's definitely legit. And it is a concern, particularly for people that are handling them daily, multiple times a day. And I don't know that I've seen a couple people wearing gloves at cash registers. Like
they've got special ones that are like finger things. Have you seen
right,
those?
I've seen those.
An individual, so maybe just the sort of your first two fingers and your thumb or something, rather than having to wear sweaty gloves all day.
Right.
And I imagine that's, significant. Well, it gets through latex as well.
It gets through latex. Yeah, BPA is like it's fat soluble and stuff, and we can talk about ways to get rid of it. But like,
what about final thing? I guess on sources, you mentioned clothing going through the dryer. I don't know what this T-shirt's made of. It looks a little bit shiny. Maybe there's some polyester in it. I know that the brand of pants that I tried, I shit you not, 15 different types of pants. Until I settled on these are bamboo cotton. But I'm like, what about the elastane liner around the top? What about the way that this is stitched across? There's probably and dermal absorption in an area that I really don't want there to be too much of it. How much are we getting leached in from the clothes that we wear?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, it's not the BPA and those chemicals. Most of the time you might have like forever chemicals and some of that as well, right? Like especially if it's like maybe not the underwear, but like a coat or something anything that's waterproof,
Gore-Tex-y type thing.
Yeah.
But I guess I suppose the one advantage of outerwear being higher in forever chemicals is that by virtue of it being outerwear, there's usually some layers in between you and it.
Right. When it comes to, undergarments or even just like our shirts and clothing, the dermal absorption is not the major source from clothing. It's not the major way that like BPA and these chemicals are getting into our system. With that said, if you're sweating, if you're working out, if there's a lot of friction, like sweat, heat, that opens pores, right? And so you can increase some absorption somewhat. There's no real data on this. It's just me like thinking about mechanism, right?
But I guess as well, one of the weird quirks of gym kit, especially the sort of gym kit where people sweat, is that it's polyester sort of fitted t-shirts, leggings, things like that people are then moving, friction, which is going to liberate something. You're sweating, that's heat. There's water, pores are open, larger aperture for whatever it is to get in.
Exactly. So, I mean, I still like...
We're not panicking. Not yet.
Yeah, you have to choose your battles, right? You have to choose your battles. I do think that, yeah, maybe some people can wear cotton athletic wear. There's not a ton of it out there. Like it has to be 100% natural fiber. So you mentioned bamboo. That would be a natural fiber. Cotton,
I imagine bedding as well,
hemp.
Stuff like that.
Bedding as well, exactly. If you're like sweating in your bed, and also just like you're breathing, like your face is right there every night. I mean, so if you can get like 100% bamboo sheets are like really soft as well. So I mean, that would be, I mean, again, you can start to go down the rabbit hole. Believe me, I've been there. But I think for most, 99% of the people, like focusing on like the major culprits will keep you sane.
Before we continue, sleep isn't just about how long you rest, but how well your body stays in its optimal temperature range throughout the night. And this is where 8 Sleep comes in. Just add their brand new Pod 4 Ultra to your mattress like a fitted sheet, and it automatically cools down or warms up each side of your bed up to 20 degrees. It's got integrated sensors that track your sleep time, sleep phases, your HRV, your snoring, and your heart rate with 99% accuracy. And it'll even start cooling or heating your bed for you an hour before bedtime. This is why 8 Sleep has been clinically proven to increase total sleep by up to 1 hour every night. And best of all, they've got a 30-night sleep trial, so you can buy it and sleep on it for a full month. If you don't like it, they'll give you your money back, and they ship internationally. If you have any respect at all for Dr. Rhonda Patrick, she uses one too. So don't just take the word of an idiot, take the word of a doctor. Right now, you can get $350 off the Pod 4 Ultra by going to the link in the description below or heading to 8sleep.com/modernwisdom using the code modernwisdom at checkout. That's EIGHT sleep.com/modernwisdom and modernwisdom at checkout. The one elephant in the room when we're talking about this, which is, and obviously everybody, including me, is now thinking, all right, okay, where are the places that I've got plastic in my life? Well, I've switched all of my Tupperware out from plastic to glass. Well, I use glass water bottles, or I use like an AquaTrue reverse osmosis thing. That's good. That goes into a glass carafe, and I'm using like a Yeti cool, blah, blah, blah. But the food that we eat, even the best quality steaks, unless you're going to the farmer's market and he's chopped it off the cow and put it in wax paper, it's wrapped in plastic.
Right.
I work with Piedmontese and make amazing beef. My favorite beef in the world. It's the tastiest stuff. Arrives to me wrapped in plastic. So, have you got any idea when it comes to packaging of vegetables, even the organic double washed spinach that's in one of those sort of big tray things with the plastic across the top and it's all around the sides? How big of a deal is that?
Yes, exactly. I've gone down that rabbit hole, so I'm glad you brought it up. When it comes to like meats and stuff, I mean, exactly. And even if you're like out hunting it, like you've got a lot of meat, you're gonna store it in your freezer and you're gonna vacuum seal it, and it's gonna be in a plastic vacuum sealed bag, right? Like it's unavoidable. The reality is that if you can, the more the plastic breaks down over time. So time, oxygen, heat, these are all a factor in the breakdown of plastics into our food, and also the chemicals associated with them. So if you're, if the plastic is only on your meat for a short period of time, or it's in the freezer, at least it's a little more stable.
As opposed to if you've got a bottle of Evian in Dubai that's been transported via truck 2 or 3 or 4 different journeys, and it's been hot and it's been cool again, then it's been hot and then it's been cool again, then finally gets into a fridge and you go, it's been in the fridge, it's cold.
Exactly.
And you go,
exactly.
What about the rest of the supply chain?
Bingo. Exactly. So, I mean, this is the way I think about it. And, when it comes to like the vegetables and all that stuff, the same goes. I mean, like when I get my vegetables, I rinse them off, because you can rinse off some of the stuff that's not quite absorbed. But you don't want to put it in a plastic bag and store it in your refrigerator if you can. Like I just put like a paper towel down and put the vegetables on top of that. If you're getting, like, I buy blueberries, they come in a plastic container. Like, what are you going to do? You rinse off the blueberries. You kind of hope for the best. It's not like the blueberries have been in that plastic container for years, right? Obviously, blueberries
Can't have been in there for that long, or else they'd be dead.
Right. So you have to have some peace of mind and realize, okay, we do live in a plastic world. At the end of the day, it does come down to the breakdowns of this plastic, and so the things that you want to avoid are, like you said, the bottled water, the heat touching the plastic. You want to get a reverse osmosis filter. So reverse osmosis, you mentioned AquaTrue. That's a great countertop one. Yeah, I have a lot of friends that use that because it's a countertop.
What do you use?
I'm actually in the process of getting an in-home, like, full system.
Cool. You're using Greenfield for that?
No.
His dad makes one of the most advanced in-home water things.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's like actually absolute like father, like son, biohacker.
I wonder if so the company, I can't remember. I have to look at my phone, but the company that I was going with they store the water's stored in stainless steel instead of plastic jugs.
So you're getting it delivered. You're not getting it.
No. What I mean is like the housing, the tubes, and then there's like the storage containers that are like part of the system.
Okay, right.
I don't know exactly how it works.
So they're remapping the whole house to have no plastic in the pipes?
No. No. It's just the filtration that's, well, actually, I mean, in a way, it's just that what's coming through my showers, what's going to come through.
Because the filtration's going to be close to the last point.
Exactly.
Right. Understood. Well, Ben will be listening, so I'm sure he'll tell me whether or not.
Well, the one thing to consider with reverse osmosis filtration is it does. So the great thing about reverse osmosis is it filters out not only microplastics, but it filters out nanoplastics. It filters out really, really, really tiny particles and chemicals, including trace elements and minerals and things that we need.
What's your favorite? This is a good question. What is your favorite remineralization protocol, presuming that you use some sort of reverse osmosis system?
So that's what I was looking into, and there are some systems that will remineralize the water after it's been filtrated, so you don't have to
think about
it or add something back, which is kind of annoying. However, you can add something back, particularly if you've already got a system in use and you haven't done that. I think
most people, the most realistic solution that people will get will be some sort of tabletop type solution rather than replumbing their entire house.
So there's a variety of drops that you can add to your water that are in like a glass container that will remineralize you're talking like magnesium, potassium, lithium, manganese, just a lot of the trace elements that are. Do
you have any brands that you like? Do you know?
Well, I haven't gotten any of those, but there's also a mineral supplement you can take. And I do know of a good one from Pure Encapsulations. It's called Mineral 50 or Pure 50. And there's a one with and without iron, depending on, a lot of men don't want iron. And it really is, it's essentially all the minerals that are filtered out of water from reverse osmosis. And it's just one like tablet that you take a day.
Yeah. I was a partner with AquaTrue. I think there's still maybe you can try, for the people that are listening, you can maybe try MW25 as a code. I'm not on commission, but I was a partner with AquaTrue for ages. They also make Air Doctor. I'm not sure if so. Air Doctor is a carbon and there's two types of filter for your house. Again, just a standalone unit that does. It's called Ideal Living is the company. They also did this. I didn't realize, you may have looked into this, atomizers. You put essential oils into them. The process that goes through also pushes a ton of stuff that you don't want into the atmosphere. Yankee candles and stuff like that, also liberating a ton of stuff that you don't really want. I remember OGs of the channel will remember that where we very, very first started this podcast in my house in Newcastle, I had a candle obsession for a while, and the ceiling of this room had accumulated so much soot that it looked like it was moldy. It was a really nice house, really nicely decorated room, and we got shit on the internet for 6 months, more than 6 months, like a full year, before I had to pay decorators to come in just to paint the ceiling so that people on the internet would shut up. My point being, I went through like a candle a month or something, and I was like, that's on the ceiling. That's in my lungs. Like, not good.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So obviously there's air filters, like a high quality HEPA filter, which is a great one that does filter out the microplastics. Vacuuming also can disturb and bring microplastics in the air. Some vacuums have HEPA filters on them as well.
Yep.
But a lot of things to consider. But you mentioned air quality and air pollution and chemicals that are in it, and that's another. So the other area is, can you get rid of any of these chemicals like BPA? How do you excrete them, or some of the things that you're breathing in, right? So that's the next question.
I actually think before we get into how you get them out of you, can you just do a run through of best tactics for avoidance? Like, super simple. This is what we know. I know it's going to be imperfect. I know that everybody with health anxiety is just their heart rate's, 20% higher than it should be. What's the 80-20 on avoiding plastics in consumption?
I do. I think there's imperfect avoidance, right? You're not going to avoid it 100%. But I think I would say the top things to consider and try to implement in your life would be: one, get a high quality reverse osmosis filter, whether it's countertop or whole house system. That's first and foremost. Number two, avoid drinking as much as possible out of plastic bottles. Also, cans are lined with plastic lining as well. So consider that as well. Number three, avoid heating plastic. So really, like the to-go coffee mugs is a big one. Bring your own, mug like this here, Yeti. I bring Yetis I bring them when I travel, and I ask them can you put my latte in this mug? And they do it.
I just had an idea there. So I've become addicted, keep where you are, but I become addicted to Dutch Bros coffee, and I kind of need to tell the internet about it. It's phenomenal. I wonder if there is a way. I was watching them make it, because when you go through the drive-thru, you can actually see the process of them going through it. A lot of the time when they make an iced coffee, an iced latte, they're pouring it between almost what looks like a cocktailier's shaker, the steel thing, pouring it between that and pouring it between your cup. I haven't done this yet, but one of the things that I thought about, because the cup is typically filled with the ice, then they pour the hot liquid over the ice, and that's what cools it. I was like, if I said, rather than you pouring it from the steel thing into the plastic, could I just get you to do two steel things side by side, put the ice in that one, cool it down, and then pop it into the plastic thing for me? Obviously, the gold standard would be to take your own cup. But if you would say that you don't have that, I also have to assume that iced drinks are going to be better, even if you get a splash of hot hitting the cup that you can't get them to do some fancy cocktail trick with. It's going to cool it down more quickly, so it's not going to liberate for as long, to as small.
Exactly. And if you think about it, if you're getting an iced cup of fill in the blank, that's plastic, the beverage isn't in that cup for that long, right? So the breakdown, it's not really
as
happening.
Opposed to you waiting for 20 minutes for it to become a consumable temperature.
Yeah, or as opposed to like bottled water, like you said, it's like, how long has it been in there, and the heat it's been in, how many trucks has it been on, and warehouses has it gone through before it's been in that refrigerator that you think is cold. So, and I do want to mention another thing with coffee, but I'll get back to the imperfect avoidance.
So we've got reverse osmosis, not drinking tap water. Second up is avoiding bottled water. Third one is avoiding heating plastic, which would include Tupperware, reheating meals, meal prep companies, stuff like that, I'm going to guess.
Yes, yeah, all that, because that's, they're putting a lot of stuff in plastic, right? And then I did mention like canned soup is really bad, because it's in a can that's lined with BPA, and the soup goes in hot. It goes in hot.
Oh, when they fill it?
Yeah. So there have been studies that have compared people that get canned soup to like soup made in glass.
Okay.
And it increases like urinary BPA by 1,000%, which is insanely high.
Do you know what the inside of Tetra Paks are like? Those sort of more carton things. Do you know what I mean by Tetra Pak?
I don't know what's in it, but I'll tell you this, and this is what I was going to get back
Probably
to.
fucking BPA.
There's something called polylactic acid that you can line. I think you can line cans with it. I know you can line to-go coffee mugs. Like I know Blue Bottle Coffee lines it with polylactic acid rather than like BPA plastic. So polylactic acid, why not replace this plastic lining?
That's not liberated in the same way. Wouldn't impact us.
It's an organic. It's not plastic. Polylactic acid. It's like an organic compound.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, you just have to make sure that, with anything, sometimes companies will mix a little plastic in there and you never really know, right? Like that's always
the supply chain of your plastic, let alone your food.
But let's just assume that everyone's like,
Fair.
credible and doing the right thing. Yeah, polylactic acid. I don't know why like Starbucks and all these companies and cans, everything should be lined with it because it's it's healthy. It's a healthier option.
I'm going to look into that for Newtonic. Okay, so what's next up after this? Soup, heating stuff, Tupperware. I mean, dear God, please just replace all of your Tupperware with glass.
Exactly, and also your utensils. Like don't use spatulas that are made of plastic.
Wood
is fine. Yeah, wood. Also Teflon, like
coatings.
Pans and stuff, coating. Like you want to have stainless steel, or you want to do cast iron or ceramic, right? Like you don't want things that are coated because like you just never know what's in that coating.
I saw a comparison image on Twitter of one of those, the non-stick pans, but one of those that's you've used for 2.5 years and it's got loads of scratches in it. And that causes all hell to break loose and be liberated into the food.
Absolutely. I mean, think about the scratches. Like that stuff is going somewhere. Like, where's it going? Right?
It's
going into your food.
It's
right.
It's
going into you. So that's another. Heat is a really big one. And also microwave popcorn. So the inside of bags, the inside of the bags of microwave popcorn are lined with forever chemicals. Forever chemicals are called that PFAS because it takes our body like 2 to 5 years to get rid of them, and they are carcinogens. They're terrible. And so, you're heating it up, right? The popcorn's heating up. So popcorn bags is another one. But I think, in terms of that, and then, with respect to like the foods, obviously, like if you can like shrimp, eating whole sardines, anything like microplastics are in the digestive tract of those foods. So like limiting, you just don't want to eat shrimp like every day.
What are capsules, 000 capsules for supplements? What's that made of?
What are those?
Like a capsule, like
magnesium stearate?
Like any type of creatine capsule or something where it's in it's capsulated as opposed to just
gelatin.
A raw tablet. Is that what it is? Is it gelatin typically?
It's usually not plastic.
I was just looking at it and thinking, I bet that someone somewhere has realized that we can make it 50% cheaper if we use some sort of... But it's typically going to be like a gelatin thing.
Usually a high quality supplement would be, I haven't seen the plastic ones, but I don't go around to the...
Well, that's the first place that I've identified that doesn't have plastics in so far, so I can breathe a sigh of relief around all of the tablets that I take every day.
I think if you're doing those things though, that's like the majority of trying to decrease
Ventilate
your exposure,
outside
and then
from the dryer,
right, and then have a HEPA filter in your house. Like
what do you like to use?
I mean, you can use like there's a lot of different, there's like high quality medical grade ones that are a little more expensive, which are great. But for people that are just like say they live in a condo or like they have a small flat or something, even getting like a Honeywell HEPA filter, like for each room, they're really not that expensive. And they do filter out a lot of particulate matter that you're, breathing in, including microplastics. So, I mean, that's a pretty, I think, feasible option for
good
people.
Start on a endlessly comprehensive list. In other news, this episode is brought to you by Momentous. Rhonda just mentioned that microplastics accumulate in the brain 10 to 20 times faster than in other organs, which is a terrifying statistic, which is why optimizing your brain health is more important than ever, and one of the best science-backed tools for that is omega-3s. They support cognition, reduce inflammation, and improve your heart health, making them essential for your well-being. They literally are one of the most important supplements I take every single day. And with Momentous, you know that you are getting the highest quality omega-3s on the market. Momentous are literally unparalleled when it comes to rigorous third-party testing. What you read on the label is what's in the product, and absolutely nothing else. Omegas are a massive part of my brain, body, and sleep stack, which has a big impact on my cognition, my strength, my recovery. And best of all, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can buy it and try it for 29 days. If you don't like it, I'll just give you your money back, and they ship internationally. And you can get 20% off everything by going to the link in the description below or heading to livemomentous.com/modernwisdom and using the code modernwisdom at checkout. That's livemomentous.com/modernwisdom and modern wisdom at checkout. Okay, so if we've got, that's how to avoid them, this is where they come from. How possible is it for our bodies to actually get rid of them? What are the ways that we can speed this up? Actually, first question, is it possible to test? Can I go and work out how many microplastics are in my body?
That's a good question. So I've had people emailing me about tests they're developing for measuring microplastics in circulation. You have to remember, once it gets into circulation, like that's when it's going to other organs, right? I haven't seen any validated tests on actual microplastics yet, but there are tests on the chemicals associated with them. So like BPA, phthalates, forever chemicals. And the test that I use is from Vibrant Wellness. They have they have a really great toxin panel test.
Total Tox.
Yep. And so they do everything, like all those chemicals and others. They do like mycotoxins, they do heavy metals. And, I don't have any affiliation with them, but I think they've got a great
It's the same one
test.
that my doctor, Gabrielle Lyon, it's the same one that her team suggested, and it came back and everything was fucking red. So, I can vouch for the fact that it's accurate.
Right. So that would be, the testing wise. Now, again, with microplastics, I think we're going to start to see a lot of tests come out now that this is...
Brian Johnson's trying to develop one. He was tweeting about it recently. I mean, he's tweeting about a lot of things at the moment. But yeah, he was tweeting about some microplastics test.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a variety of companies, and I'm sure Vibrant Wellness is probably going to add that to their list as well.
Okay, so that's how we find out. How can I get rid of them? I got too many microplastics in my body. How do I get rid of them?
Yeah, so microplastics, we kind of talked about a little bit getting rid of them, and that really the main source is excretion through feces, and that happens with dietary fiber. So if you are eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, that does increase the chances that microplastics are going to move their way out through feces.
Is
more
that
readily.
only microplastics that you're consuming along with it, or is it able to pull microplastics, sort of detoxify them from your body?
I think it's in general, to be honest, because if you think about like fiber, what does it do? It moves stuff through your body. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you just ate, right? Like it could be something that you had hours before. So if you're getting like daily fiber, right? Like thinking about getting your total daily fiber, I think that's something that is important because it's moving it out of your body, so you can't absorb it through both ways, like the ways of just moving it through, but also with the type of fiber that's found in things like berries and apples. So these are pectins, like inulin, all this type of fermentable fiber, green bananas, resistant starch, like that stuff makes viscous gel-like substance in your gut, which encapsulates microplastics so that you're not absorbing them. So really, I think it's just like more important to focus on the daily fiber intake versus with a meal.
So is that the biggest mover, daily fiber intake, do you think?
I do, and this is all animal data. Like this is all new. There's no real human data yet on that area in terms of like excreting it through feces and intestinal absorption. But I do think like it makes sense. Like why wouldn't it translate, right? So that's something that I think is important. Oh, the other thing this just came out, this is interesting, also animal data. So forever chemicals, I mentioned forever chemicals, those take 2 to 5 years to excrete, to get rid of. I say excrete, to detoxify, get out of your body. They stay in your body forever. That's why they're called forever chemicals. Unlike bisphenol A, which is it's in your body for like up to 4 or 5 hours, any from 2 to 5 hours. This is really kind of daily excretion, and it's excreted through urine. But there's studies showing that they're called beta glucans, and they're in oats and they're in mushrooms. But the study used oats. The beta glucans, which is, by the way, a fermentable type of fiber, they actually caused excretion of the forever chemicals, PFAS, in animals, which is something that doesn't happen. So they increase the excretion through, it's this whole mechanism that affects like your liver, or your bile acid and liver and cholesterol and all this like fancy stuff that, might be confusing to explain. But essentially, that's been shown to increase the excretion of forever chemicals. So I've actually been adding a lot of oats. In fact, I had some oatmeal this morning because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Like the reason why I also think it's happening in humans is because there was a human study, not with oats, but it's a drug that's used to lower cholesterol, and it does the exact same thing that oats, the beta glucans in oats do. It was shown to clear forever chemicals in people.
Wow.
So I'm like, oh, okay, add the dots here.
What about sauna?
Sauna. So I'm talking about excreting things through urine or feces, right? So bisphenol A and a lot of these plastic chemicals, the primary route of excretion is through urine. And there is a way, I think, that we can excrete them. Sauna, you're excreting mostly is through sweat. And there are a lot of toxins that we're exposed to that we do excrete through sweat. A lot of those are heavy metals. So, for example, cadmium and aluminum. So aluminum is associated with Alzheimer's disease. They're more readily excreted through sweat than through urine. And so when you get in the sauna, you can excrete a little bit of BPA. It does come out through sweat as well. However, the majority of excretion chemicals that are being excreted through sweat are things like some heavy metals and things like that. So that is important for excretion of a lot of, compounds that are detrimental to health. But when it comes to BPA, for example, or phthalates, these compounds they're fat soluble. And in order for us to get rid of them, we have to make them water soluble. And there's an enzyme that does that. And that enzyme is activated by a system in our body called the NRF2 system. It's a system that's a major transcription factor that basically turns on a lot of genes, turns off a lot of genes. So what it does is it activates something called the phase 2 detoxification enzymes. These detox a lot of harmful compounds in our body. The major dietary activator of this system is a compound called sulforaphane, which is something that you can produce when you eat cruciferous vegetables like broccoli. Broccoli is a good source. Actually, the younger plant, broccoli sprouts, have 100 times more of the precursor to make sulforaphane called glucoraphanin. So you basically, the sulforaphane compound is made when the plant is like broken. So when you bite it, chew it, right? That's when you start to make the sulforaphane. So broccoli sprouts have a really, really high concentration of that precursor. There have been a variety of studies that have looked at sulforaphane and giving it to humans and it activating this system and causing the excretion of harmful compounds that we breathe in. So there have been studies in China where air pollution is terrible and people are breathing in, for example, benzene, okay? Benzene is a known carcinogen. It's also, in addition to air pollution, it's found in cigarette smoke, any plant burning material, fires, right? So this is very relevant to people like in Southern California and Los Angeles where there's a lot of wildfires and the air quality is very bad. There's benzene in the air, okay? Benzene's a carcinogen. So there have been studies in China, more than one study, showing that consuming sulforaphane, about 40 micromoles of sulforaphane causes the excretion of benzene to increase within 24 hours by 60%. So this is really big.
You can't supplement sulforaphane?
You can, and I do supplement with it. So I take a supplement called Avmacol, and that supplement has been used in a lot of different clinical studies because they've got a very reliable source of glucoraphanin, and the enzyme myrosinase is very unstable. It's sensitive to heat. So if you heat broccoli up really hot, you're actually like degrading a lot of the sulforaphane that you're going to potentially make.
If someone's eating broccoli raw would be optimal? Optimal,
or just lightly cooked, lightly cooked.
So this company has been very delicate with how they've
got, so I take 2 of their advanced Avmacol, which has about, it's like 68 micromoles or something per tablet. And so actually taking 1 tablet of that was equivalent to the study on benzene excretion. So I take 2 tablets a day. And the reason I do that is because I also want to increase glutathione, which is a antioxidant, a very powerful antioxidant in our body. There have been clinical studies showing that people taking sulforaphane increase their glutathione levels in their plasma and also in their brain. So in the brain, I mean, it's hugely important for cognitive function, for brain aging, everything like that. So I take anywhere between 2 to 4 Avmacols a day because and by the way, I have no affiliation with them. Their stabilization process is really great. It's in a tablet form versus like a capsule. So capsules are cheaper to make, but they retain water, and water degrades the myrosinase enzyme. So
dancing through this minefield is basically impossible, isn't it?
There's a lot to consider. But when it comes back to the sulforaphane and BPA, there's not direct human evidence that it's causing the excretion. I think it's doing it because, 1, there's an animal study showing that if you give animals sulforaphane and then give them a toxic level of BPA, it doesn't induce toxicity. 2, sulforaphane activates these very enzymes that cause BPA to become water soluble and excreted. That's known. 3, we have all this data, human clinical data showing that sulforaphane causes the excretion of other harmful compounds that also have to be converted to be water soluble, like benzene and acrolein, for example. So I think there's a lot of evidence suggesting that sulforaphane would help with excretion of BPA.
You touched on something there. I don't know whether you've got any advice or whether you'd feel comfortable, but a lot of people will have been directly impacted by the fires in LA or indirectly just by it's happened around them. They've been more stressed and they've been breathing in this air, which presumably is still probably going to be in the local ecology. Is there anything, how worried do you think that people should be about what's being liberated into the air? And if you were someone that's been worried, is there a particular protocol or some things that you would consider over the next few weeks and months to try and just help yourself get back to a good place of health?
I do. And, I have several friends that have been, impacted by the LA fires, and I've kind of talked to them about some of this stuff. So first, I've avoiding going outside or wearing a mask if you're like there in the thick of it, right? When it's like really, really bad air quality. But having a HEPA filter inside, 1, and 2, the sulforaphane. So I've now told several friends that they should be taking Avmacol. Again, I don't have any affiliation with them. There's multiple clinical studies using their formulation, very reliable. And so, taking anywhere between 2 to 4 a day to increase the excretion of a lot of these harmful compounds that are in the air. Now, that's not going to cause you, like the microplastics that you're breathing in, sulforaphane isn't going to help with that. It's going to help with the chemical aspects of it. The microplastics themselves, like, because plastics are burning and lots of stuff, particulate matters in the air, that's where you get the HEPA filters. That's important to help with the breathing in that air, right? So
I hope that we haven't caused too much health anxiety for people with that. I'm aware that there's a number of vectors. Everybody can get worried about how much is, oh my God, I've got them. Not even the food that I need to be worried about. It's what it's wrapped in. And I had this story, a funny story from a friend that was telling me about, he goes to a farmer's market and he wants to get raw milk, and the raw milk's in glass bottles and it's got a cap on it. There's at no point is there any plastic anywhere near it. And he asked the farmer about how they get the milk from the cows. And there's an automatic pumping machine which runs it through plastic pipes. He's like, that's warm milk going through a plastic pipe. Even the most psychedelic, progressive farmer's market in the world, where you think, this is basically, you might as well have sort of pumped the cow into a steel bucket and poured it into this. It's like, yeah, some plastic pipes were in between.
I can add to that story. That's going to freak you out even more. So
bring it on.
So
no one's worried enough. So.
We're talking about forever chemicals, right? And how humans don't excrete them for like years. Well, it turns out these forever chemicals are because they're in our water source, right? Again, wastewater plants aren't treating for them, so they're concentrating in things like sludge that's used on a lot of non-organic farms. But the non-organic farms are a very close proximity to organic farms.
What's a non-organic farm?
Well, I just mean they're not organic, right? They're not.
Right. Okay.
So organic farms are not technically supposed to use sludge, right? So which includes like wastewater. As
it's not
fertilizer.
As if the wastewater and the sludge knows that this is the boundary of the edge.
Exactly. It gets into the soil and it leaches here, right? And so it's actually contaminated a lot of like organic farms as well. And there was a Consumer Report study a couple of years ago that went and sampled a lot of dairy products off of shelves, like grass milk, the organic grass milk, and just a lot of different varieties of milk. Why were they targeting milk? Well, it turns out forever chemicals, cows do excrete them. Unlike humans, cows excrete them through their milk. So when you are eating yogurt or milk or cheese, butter, these are all things where you're like, you have to consider, are there forever chemicals in my dairy product? Because this Consumer Report found that lots of products, including the organic ones, had much, much higher levels of PFAS than are considered safe.
Obviously, this is your sort of one of your many new pet research obsessions. How big of a deal across the entire repertoire of things that people need to be worried about? how highly do you rank the plastics, microplastics, endocrine disruptors?
I do rank them highly. I think the highest would be, exercising consistently, 5 days a week, not being overweight, obese, trying to eat a more whole foods diet. But that includes, like, it's up there after those things, because I do think there's insidious damage that's happening. We are accumulating them in our organs. We're starting to now unpack that this is actually affecting human health. And there are a few high-level things that we can do to minimize our exposure that we've discussed. Focusing on those few high-level things, the water filters, trying to not heat the plastic, trying to, like, minimize the single-use plastics that you're using. It's not going to be, 100%, but minimize it as much as you can. You're doing a lot if you can do that, right? I do think that, like, you don't want to become a manic person about it, because chronic stress is bad for you. So that's, like, you have to kind of, like, draw the line and live your life. Like, I've kind of done that myself, where it's like, okay, like, it's imperfect, but I'm going to do what I can. And I know that that's going to have a good impact, especially if I'm exercising and I'm eating healthy and I'm trying to do all the other things that are, like, the most important, getting my micronutrients, like doing those things, at the end of the day, it's going to be okay.
Okay. You said you were doing some research into ultra-processed foods as well. I have been learning about this GRAS, GRAS loophole thing. Is this the pebble at the top of the avalanche that sort of wrecked the American food system? Is that why there's a big issue?
No. Short answer.
Good.
I know it can be confusing. So you're talking about generally recognized as safe, GRAS, and that's, you mentioned loophole, but let's take a step back. Before the loophole, there was just GRAS. There was the generally recognized as safe, and this has been around since, like, the early 1900s, and it's essentially things can go into the food, our food supply, that are generally recognized as safe. So it was meant to be, for things like vinegar or salt, right? Like, not these chemicals that we have to have a lot of testing, and FDA has to look at all this testing. Well, generally recognized as safe back then was something you did have to submit to the FDA for review. And then the FDA would look over whatever data you gave them if you're a manufacturing company, and they'd say, okay, it looks like it's safe. The loophole, it came about, and I think it was, like, the late 1990s, like 1997. And that was, like, that basically said, okay, manufacturers no longer have to submit anything to the FDA for a review. They can just review it internally and decide whether or not it's safe. So it kind of gave, and there's a lot of controversy over this. There's a lot of, you give a lot of freedom to manufacturers who obviously have a conflict of interest because they want to sell their products, and they can kind of decide whether or not something is generally recognized as safe. With respect to the ultra processed foods in general, there's processed foods and then there's ultra processed foods, right? Like, what's the difference? So processed foods, typically, like, this is minimal processing. This is something like making oats, something where you want to increase the bioavailability of nutrients, which, oats increases the bioavailability of some of the minerals and stuff. Or chopping and freezing fruits and vegetables, like frozen fruits and vegetables that you can buy in the freezer.
Every food has some form of processing in it, unless you're eating it actually raw from the ground.
Exactly. So it's very minimal, right? The ultra processed foods, or UPFs, as sometimes you'll see them called UPFs. These are foods that have a lot of steps of processing. And typically, the purpose of these foods is convenience. It's improving texture, flavor, improving appearance, colors,
Shelf
life, exactly. So what ends up happening, these types of foods end up having a lot of calories. There are a lot of added sugar. They have a lot of chemicals that may make it taste really good, texture really good. They'll have additives that will extend the shelf life, and they'll have a lot of colors. So you can find them in candies, cereals, a lot of junk food, cookies, chips, crackers, already flavored yogurts, protein bars. I mean, there's a lot of packaged types of foods. Like this is, fast foods, already prepared meals that you buy, long list of ingredients. There's over 10,000 chemicals that's in our food system in the United States, 10,000 chemicals that are in our foods. Like that's a lot of chemicals. They're not all coming in through GRAS. I mean, these are chemicals like a lot of the, for example, the food colorings. So you mentioned earlier in the podcast, red number 3, red number 40, yellow number 5, number 6, blue number 1. Like these food colorings have been around for a long time in our foods. And just recently now, the FDA has banned red number 3 from our foods in the United States because it's a carcinogen. It's a known carcinogen. And, this is, I think they have like 2 years or so to actually, manufacturers have 2 years to get it off the shelf. So until like 2027 or something like that. But, these food colorings are not only known carcinogens, they also known mutagens. So those are things that damage DNA. It's a precursor for something to become a carcinogen. There's a lot of human data that it affects the brain. These colors affect the brain. They cause and exacerbate hyperactivity, impulse control. So,
how robust is the evidence on this?
I would say there's varying. It appears a lot of the studies are done in children and adolescents. And there's lots of data out there. Oftentimes, the randomized controlled trials that are done give all of the colors. So it's not just like one, but they give all of the colors. And children seem to have varying sensitivities to them. So there's individual variation.
Yep.
But it's pretty robust that a large subset of children and adolescents are affected by these. And if you think about by these colors that are in all the foods that are targeted to children and adolescents.
A quick aside, what if I told you the only way to be successful in life is to wake up and eat a bowl of Wheaties? Well, I would never tell you that. But starting a day with Element, that is the real breakfast of champions. And that's why I've started every morning with Element for the last 3 years. Each grab-and-go stick contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium with no sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, or any other junk. It plays a critical role in reducing muscle cramps and fatigue while optimizing brain health, regulating appetite, and curbing cravings. You might not need more sleep. You might not need more caffeine. You might just be dehydrated. And proper hydration isn't just about drinking sufficient water. It's about having enough electrolytes to allow your body to properly absorb those fluids, which is why it's used by everyone. Dr. Mike Israetel, Olympic athletes, Dr. Andrew Huberman, and FBI sniper teams. Also, they have a no questions asked refund policy. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll give you your money back. You don't even need to return the box because that's how confident they are that you love it. Right now, you can get a free sample pack of all 8 flavors with your first box by going to the link in the description below or heading to drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom. That's drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom. So we made a capsule version of Newtonic, and we got rid of the caffeine and the L-theanine, and we added in some Bacopa monnieri and Ginkgo biloba. And I didn't realize this, but colored capsules were around in the 90s. It's like, capsules, the most boring thing in the world. What can we do to make them a little bit more visually exciting, turn them into sort of a marketing material, also create a little bit of an expectation effect in there as well? Why don't we use colored capsules? That'd be great. It's like, well, pills, red pill. If we make a red pill, people are going to think the jokes write themselves. Matrix, we did this Matrix theme. And with that, on the launch shoot, and Harry, the guy that runs the ops for Newtonic, came up and he's like, mate, got some good news and got some bad news about the capsules. It's like, what's up? They look great. He's like, yeah. They're colored with red 40. And I was like, right, you're telling me that the productivity focus product that we've tried to design has something that's been linked to ADHD in children. It's literally encased in ADHD causing color. Yeah. And he's like, but we've got these vegan capsules. Okay, that's interesting. Let me have a look. He gets them out. I was like, that's brown. That's brown. That's a brown color. What we have here on set is this beautiful sort of bright red thing, because red 40 turns things bright red. So we had to get custom beetroot colored capsules. That was the way that we got around it, because I wasn't prepared to do the brown one. I wasn't prepared to do the red 40 one. So we ended up having to we've got like some absurd number of empty beetroot colored capsules waiting to be filled for the next however long that we keep on selling these things. But that was the hoop that we had to jump through in order to be able to sort of skirt around trying to avoid red 40, even in just the coloring of a capsule. It's crazy.
Precisely. I mean, there are ways around it, right? Like beetroot, spinach, turmeric, like these can color things, and you can find a lot of healthier, quote unquote healthier. There's still processed foods. We can talk about that, get more into that in a minute. But there are, at least you're not having chemicals that are known carcinogens, that are known to disrupt cognitive function, to be, to exacerbate and play a role in impulse control and impulsivity, and like not being able to focus and pay attention, right?
Trans fats were in there too, weren't they?
This is incredible. This is incredible because trans fats were actually added through the original GRAS, generally recognized as safe. They were added in like the early 1900s. This is something like 1911. They were added to our food supply. And, remember, trans fats, there was a big push for trans fats, dating, I mean, certainly back into like the 1950s was like when it really started to become sort of popular. But even before that, they were added to our food supply because they were thought to be the quote unquote healthier alternative, because they didn't raise, they weren't saturated fat and therefore didn't raise LDL cholesterol. Okay. But the problem is that, so trans fats, they all have their fatty acid chains that have double bonds between the carbons. Okay. Saturated fat doesn't have any double bonds. And this is really important because it changes the structure of the fat when it's incorporated into our cells. So we eat fat and it's broken down into fatty acids. These fatty acids get taken up into new cells that we make in our body. All of our cells that we're making that are new. Red blood cells, neurons, the cells that are lining our blood vessels and our arteries, they're endothelial cells. The reason this is important is because fatty acids that are taken up into those cells are making up the membrane, okay? So a cell, if you think about like a cell as a circle, has this membrane, and the membrane is like movable, it's flexible. And you want that to be flexible because that's how we transport nutrients into the cell. There's transporters, there's receptors that bind to hormones, they bind to neurotransmitters. The cell needs to be flexible for those things to happen and to be correct. It affects the function of the cell. So when you have trans fats, so saturated fat is like a single bond, same with unsaturated fat, single bond. It's bendable. It's like able to bend and move, right? Trans fats have these double bonds and make it really stiff. Like it doesn't move. It's a very stiff structure. So when they get incorporated into our cell membranes, it stiffens our cells. It totally changes like the flexibility of it. And when that happens in the endothelial cells that line our blood vessels and our arteries, it causes them to become stiff. So our blood vessels can't dilate as well, like vasodilation, right? It causes cardiovascular disease. It affects hypertension. It's hugely, hugely bad for the heart. And, this is something that it took. So the FDA, I think it was like in 2006, they started to go, maybe not so good. And finally in 2015, they're like, okay, we're going to take this out. This is no longer allowed in the food supply. But we got to give manufacturers some time to get it off the shelves. So finally in 2018, it was off the shelves. We're talking 100 years, over 100 years that this stuff was in our food supply, causes cardiovascular disease. It doesn't take that much time to figure out. Yes, cardiovascular disease takes decades to develop, but does it take 10 decades to figure that out? No. So that was like, trans fats is like the golden example of, how things get into the food. They're thought to be safe. And it takes how many decades before we realize, they're actually responsible for a lot of deaths.
It's wild that was still in food in 2017.
It is. And, the trans fats, thankfully they're out of our food now, but there's other chemicals, right? I mentioned there's 10,000 chemicals in foods. So the ultra-processed foods, another one that's really a big one is nitrites. So nitrites are in...
Not nitrates.
Okay, glad you mentioned that. Let's discuss. So,
right, brilliant.
Nitrites are found in processed meats, right? So they're a preservative. They're found in bacon, in, ham, lunch meats, hot dogs, like things like that, right? They can be converted, when we digest them, and they can be converted in our gut to nitrosamines. And these are carcinogens. And this is why processed meats has been classified sort of as a carcinogen, because there's
Bacon?
Bacon with, especially when you're cooking it at like a high temperature, you can convert it to the nitrosamines as well. So bacon with nitrites can be unhealthy because of the
How do you know if your
nitrosamines.
bacon's got nitrites in it?
Well, there's a lot of labels out there on bacon that says it's uncured. So they usually cure it with nitrites.
Okay, so uncured bacon would be nitrite-free?
Well, so here's the question, and it comes back to nitrates. Oftentimes the bacon...
Is this the BPA, BPS thing all over again?
Not necessarily.
Right.
Not necessarily. I think there's a silver lining.
Okay.
The nitrates, are something that's found in plants. They're in vegetables, they're in greens, they're, all over in nature. They can also be converted into nitrites and then ultimately nitrosamines. However, vitamin C prevents the conversion. So vitamin C is also found in plants, they're packaged together. So that's why when you eat, a lot of plants, or like beets have a lot of nitrates, beetroot juice extract is high in nitrates, but it's also high in vitamin C.
Okay.
And when you have the vitamin C there, it converts the nitrates into nitric oxide.
So if I have a Barocca while I have my bacon.
Exactly.
That's okay.
A lot of vitamin C while you're taking your bacon in.
Yes.
So the conversion, it basically shifts it towards nitric oxide, which is actually good for your blood vessels. It's a vasodilator, right? There are a lot of bacons that will say no nitrites, but they'll have like celery powder. I don't know how much vitamin C is in celery powder extract. I would assume not that much, but make sure you're like eating some pomegranate with your bacon or something high in vitamin C.
Okay.
That helps the conversion.
Okay.
So there's,
What about the concerns with added sugar?
Exactly. Yeah. So we talked about there's a lot of chemicals in foods, and it's 10,000 chemicals, so you can figure out how many of those may be detrimental to health. I would say one of the biggest problem with ultra processed foods is the added sugar. And when we say added sugar, we mean not sugar like if you're eating an apple, right? It's got like natural sugar in that's bound to a fiber matrix. We're talking about adding table sugar, like sucrose, glucose and fructose, 50% mixture of each into it. Foods have tons and tons of added sugar. Ultra processed foods have tons and tons of added sugar, and that's part of the hyper palatability of them, right? What's make them taste good. There's a lot of downstream problems with the added sugar, right? On the brain, on overeating. So there was actually a really good study that was published a couple of years ago out of the NIH from Kevin Hall's lab. And he took the same group of people and gave them either an ultra processed foods diet or a whole foods diet. And he gave the same group the same diet. So like the same people had each diet with a washout period, and then they measured a bunch of things, right? So you're not looking at a lot of individual variability here, right? It's called a crossover trial design. So he gave these. So what happened is these two groups. So the whole foods versus the ultra processed, right? Same number of calories in the food, same number of same amount of sodium, same amount of energy density. There were not similar amounts of added sugar. So the ultra processed foods had like 50% more added sugar. Fiber was the same, but only because they gave the ultra processed food group drinks with like Metamucil or something, right? Like they had to give them fiber because essentially processed foods have no fiber, right? And then protein was mostly similar. There was a little bit more in the whole foods group than the ultra processed foods group. But the study basically gave these people, like, again, equivalent amounts of like calories and stuff. And so the total sugars were the same. So the fruits and stuff had sugar, but it was the added sugar that was different, right? He gave these people these meals that they came into like a metabolic ward to eat, and they were basically given 60 minutes to eat their meal. So they could eat as much as they wanted or as little as they wanted. So they didn't like make them eat a certain amount. The point was to see if they were going to overeat, right? Well, it turns out when they were eating the ultra processed foods, people on average ate 500 calories more than eating the whole foods diet. So this was 500 calories more per week. And so they ended up gaining 2 pounds more they actually gained 2 pounds if they were eating ultra-processed foods, and they lost 2 pounds if they were eating whole foods. And this
From
was
zero.
from their baseline.
Yep.
From their baseline, yeah. And this was for the 2 week that the trial happened. So if you think about it, that's a pound per week they were gaining. That's 4 pounds a month. So 4 times 12 is 48. That's 48 pounds a year.
It couldn't have been 500 calories a week if they gained a pound
Sorry,
a week.
it was 500 calories per 2 weeks.
Yes.
Yes.
No, that also can't be right. 500 calories
per meal. Sorry. Yes.
Yes.
They were eating 500 calories more per meal.
Yes.
But they were gaining 2 pounds more per 2 weeks, or 1 pound per week.
Yes. So it was a 3,500 surplus per week.
Yes.
It was 500
exactly,
a day.
because it was 500 per meal.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So they were eating, overeating. And the question is, why were they overeating? Right. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. One is they weren't being satiated. So added sugar basically disrupts hormones. It disrupts the hormones that are involved in satiation, like leptin, ghrelins, a hunger hormone. So like those things were being disrupted in those individuals. And it, the question is like, if you're eating a refined sugar diet, if you're eating a lot of ultra processed foods, you're probably eating more of the foods, right? Why is that? Well, you're not being satiated, for one. Two, even though there was less protein in the ultra-processed foods, it seemed as though people were eating more almost to get their protein needs.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. Have you heard of the protein leverage hypothesis?
No.
It was Stephen Simpson, I think, was one of the main scientists involved in this hypothesis. And essentially what it is that your body needs a certain amount of protein per day to maintain physiological functions.
Mm-hmm.
And so he hypothesized that no matter what, if you were eating foods that were low in protein, you were going to overeat because you had to maintain this amount of protein that your body really needs, right? And so him and his colleagues have done some randomized controlled trials sort of proving this hypothesis, where it's you can give people lower protein, same, everything else, but they will overconsume if they have the lower protein just to kind of get up to that protein need. So that's another possibility. Again, if you're eating a lot of ultra-processed foods, they're low in protein. Protein is satiating, for one, right? That's also something to consider. But it does seem as though there's it's interesting. There might be this protein leverage hypothesis that might be partly explaining some of this as well, because it's your body's wanting to meet the protein needs for just maintaining a lot of different physiological functions that require protein.
How much good research has been done? That study sounds pretty impressive, but is primarily the mechanism that I think most people come to agree on when it comes to ultra-processed foods: hyperpalatable, calorie dense, easier to eat more, and per bite tends to be more calorific, so it's easier to gain weight. The multiple different ways that it's easier to gain weight. When it comes to the ultra-processed foods, what's in them, how they affect us, outside of the palatability and the calorie density, what else is going on that seems to be evidence-based that's something that we should be concerned about?
Yeah, well, I think that part of it is that people are consuming more of it because they're not satiated, right? It's disrupting the hormones, which I mentioned. So that is the one thing to consider.
Is that the biggest mover in all of this?
For weight gain, I would say it is, because weight gain really comes down to eating more calories. And right, calories in, calories out makes a big difference. But there's other factors at play here that I think really come down to the added sugar, right? So added sugar affects so many different things in the body, everything from, hormone production to cognition. So hormones, testosterone. I know you're interested in testosterone. There was a pretty classic study that was done that showed that men, and this was a huge age range, and we're talking young men that were 17 all the way up to older adults. So young adults, middle-aged adults, older adults, if they consumed 75 grams of added sugar, so that would be a medium-sized donut and the Coke.
Okay.
Not out of this, people do that all the time.
75 grams sounds like so much, but when you put it in terms of a donut and a Coke,
that's
not.
it.
Yeah.
It's not, right? There's a lot of Americans eating a standard American diet and eating donuts with Coke or donuts with coffee and a bunch of added sugar in their coffee, right? So it actually is something that I would say is pretty practical in terms of what people are consuming. And we can actually talk about what people are consuming in terms of added sugar. But 75 grams of added sugar. And this caused a 25% decrease in their circulating testosterone within a 2-hour range. So it's obviously transient. But nonetheless, 25% less. That's significant.
If you're chipping away at that, grazing throughout the day. Yeah,
exactly. And imagine if people are eating. I mean, if their whole diet is nothing but ultra processed foods, right? So you're talking, in that study with Kevin Hall, they actually calculated how much it costs to have the whole foods diet versus the ultra processed food diet, and it was $45 more a week for the whole foods diet. So that's significant. It adds up over like a month, right? So we're talking, what, $180 a month?
It's expensive to be healthy.
For a lot of people, that makes a difference. And so it's like economically, people are economically incentivized to eat ultra-processed foods because they're cheaper.
There's also, this is Callie Means' whole thing, and Vani Hari's as well, about whatever the food stamp system is called.
Oh, right. SNAP?
Yes, SNAP.
Yes.
The sorts of foods that tend to be available on SNAP,
right?
Trying to eat in a more healthy manner on that is very difficult,
right?
More difficult. So what you mentioned there about what are Americans eating, typically what are they putting in their bodies?
I mean, it's ultra processed foods. So the refined sugar, or I'm calling it refined sugar, it's really added sugar also, it's kind of interchangeably, but ultimately, people are eating 13% of their daily caloric intake is coming from added sugar. That's a lot. 2,000 calorie a day, if you just consider that, like on average, that's a lot of coming from sugar. In fact, guidelines, so the guidelines for like the strictest guidelines suggest no more than 5% of your total daily caloric intake coming from added sugar. So that would be like no more than 25 grams a day. 5%. People are eating 13% of their total calorie intake from added sugar. So added sugar is also affecting, probably what's happening also is there's a mechanism there. It's hyperpalatable. It tastes good. People want things that taste good. But there's an addictive aspect there as well. And that's been shown in certainly a lot of animal studies, but also some human data as well. So there's been studies showing that if people eat added sugar, it activates dopamine reward pathways in the brain, in the striatum, more than like eating fat, for example. So there was a study that compared fat versus added sugar. And so it's activating these dopamine reward pathways. Animal studies have found that it's activating dopamine reward pathways much like addictive drugs do, but to a much milder degree, of course. So what I'm saying is that you can have addictive drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, nicotine will activate these dopamine reward pathways in parts of the brain. Sugar activates them too, to a much milder degree, of course. But, in animal studies, they'll keep going back for the sugar like this addictive thing, right? Yep. Now, again, you got to take the animal studies with a grain of salt because we are not rodents. But there is human evidence that these pathways are being activated in our brain with added sugar. And there's also evidence that if you look at people that are obese, the obesogenic diet is largely consists of a lot of added sugar. Well, people that are obese have a lower density of dopamine 2 receptors, D2 receptors, really indicative of something called tolerance. So what happens if you keep activating the dopamine reward pathway is that your body, as a adaptive response, a feedback to it, goes,
habituates.
I don't need so many dopamine receptors because I had a lot of that signal coming in, right? But what ends up happening is when you have fewer of those receptors, then the little bit of dopamine that you have, you're not feeling it as much. You need more and more, right? And so, you kind of connect the dots here. And I would say certainly we need more evidence in the human arena on the, potential addictive properties of added sugar. However, what we do have is a lot of animal evidence and, some human evidence. And I think that it really indicates that it's affecting reward pathways. It's affecting our dopamine system. And that's, unhealthy.
How legitimate are the links to cancer when it comes to ultra-processed foods and sugar?
There's a lot of ways to get there. So I'll give you, obviously when you talk to a scientist, like the most robust evidence is, well, we need a randomized control trial. We need to prove causation, right? Well, you're never going to get that because it takes decades for cancer to, rear its ugly head. And that's like too expensive of a trial. But the evidence that we do have, for one, people that are obese tend to eat more added sugar. I mean, that's a fact. The obese people are eating added sugar.
As a proportion.
Yes. Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
they'll eat more of everything.
They're
overall.
eating more ultra processed foods, which are higher in added sugar, don't have a fiber matrix. The way sugar is metabolized when it's packaged in with fruit is very different than added sugar in ultra processed foods, which has no fiber matrix. And so what happens when it has a fiber matrix is it slows the metabolism of it. It really slows it down. It's not this big bolus. For one, your gut isn't seeing a big bolus of it, which causes, it actually causes intestinal permeability, and that causes inflammatory molecules to leach into your bloodstream. Inflammation is a major driver of aging, cancer. It causes damage to DNA. So all those things happen, right? And there have been studies that have shown that young men that consume, it's like 20 ounces of a sugar-sweetened beverage a day for 3 weeks. Okay, these are healthy young men.
Mm-hmm.
They're consuming like a big Coke, right? Something like that. After 3 weeks, their inflammatory biomarkers go up like 100%, like 100%. So that's causing inflammation in healthy young men.
Mm-hmm.
Again, inflammation is something that is involved in driving cancer. We know that obesity is very intimately linked to cancers. There's like 13 different cancers that obesity is known to play a role in. There's just a lot of evidence that lifestyle factors like eating ultra-processed foods, like being overweight, obese, like these are factors that can dramatically reduce cancer incidence if they are, reduced. If you reduce your ultra-processed foods, if you reduce your added sugar and lose weight, like these are things that are known. So I do think that it's pretty strong link. And again, it's multiple ways that it's happening. It's not just like, there's through the obesity, right, mechanism, but it's also causing, there's the insulin sensitivity and insulin production and just all sorts of things that are at play here.
I think it's important to separate out the obesity side from what else is going on, because lots of people that listen to the podcast will probably have a good indication of, well, where's my body weight at? And I probably go to the gym and I do all the rest of this stuff. What else is happening? How else can I motivate myself to pick the healthier option, even if I know that my waistline isn't going to be the determining factor for this? Obesity isn't that much of a risk for me. So what is it that could be happening? So I think it's interesting to sort of break it apart like that. I guess another area that I'm particularly interested in is brain health and energy levels when it comes to the impact of the ultra-processed foods, the added sugar, stuff like that.
And that's probably one of the biggest areas that it also has an impact on, so if you're eating a lot of added sugar, then, you can have you can basically be on the high end of the normal range for blood glucose levels. So you're within the normal range, but on the higher end,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're not diabetic. So you might think, oh, I don't have diabetes. I'm fine. I'm still within the normal range. But there are studies showing that people on the high end of the normal range have increased atrophy in the hippocampus part of their brain that's involved in learning and memory. And they have higher atrophy in the amygdala part of their brain that's involved in emotional regulation, compared to people on the lower end have, blood glucose levels in the lower end of the normal range.
Mm.
So that's an association study, right? There's also
angry and forgetful.
Right. But again, it's association study. There's also other studies showing that higher blood glucose levels are associated with increased, like 54% risk, increased risk for vascular dementia. So glucose, what it's doing when you have a constant intake of glucose, and that glucose, let's say you're not exercising enough to have that glucose get disposed into your muscle, which is really where you want it, right? You want it to get taken up into your muscle. Exercise really helps with that. So when you exercise, you cause a lot of glucose transporters to come up to your muscle, which opens up the gates to allow glucose in. You want it to go to your muscle instead of your adipose tissue. If that doesn't happen, if you're not exercising enough, the glucose will stay around in your bloodstream. And what happens is, yes, there's an insulin response and all that metabolic stuff, but there's also something that happens that's called the Maillard reaction. And it's where glucose reacts with lipids, it reacts with DNA in your body, it reacts with proteins and damages them. And when it reacts with proteins, like, for example, collagen, lining your pericardium surrounding your heart, your myocardium surrounding your heart, lining your blood vessels, it causes the collagen to become stiff. It changes the properties of the protein. It makes them stiff, kind of like trans fats. Actually, that's a really good analogy. I didn't think about that, but it's really kind of the similar thing. It causes your blood vessels to become stiff. It causes your the tissue surrounding your heart to become stiff. And that plays a major role in the stiffening of the heart with age, which affects, it affects cardiovascular disease risk, right? So you're talking about just an accumulation of this Maillard reaction. What happens is it forms something called advanced glycation end products, and that's what is basically stiffening the proteins like collagen, which are around forever. Your collagen surrounding your heart, and it's there, and you don't want to make it stiffer, right? So that's something to consider, as well as the fact that it is affecting cognition and the brain as well. So we talked about brain aging. It causes inflammation. So, for example, I mentioned the study of men that consumed the sort of 20-ounce sugar-sweetened beverage, and they had 100% increase in their inflammatory markers after 3 weeks. Well, inflammation is essentially those molecules are getting into the brain, crossing over the blood-brain barrier, and they're getting into the brain. It was thought for a long time that inflammatory molecules don't cross the blood-brain barrier, but that years ago was debunked. We now know a lot of cytokines and inflammatory things are crossing the blood-brain barrier. And when they get into the brain, they are doing a variety of things. For one, they're affecting mood immediately. And we know that for a fact. We know causally. You can take a healthy person and inject them with lipopolysaccharide, which is something it's found in our gut. It's a component of bacterial membranes. So we have a lot of bacteria in our gut that makes up our microbiome. When you have leaky gut, intestinal permeability, lipopolysaccharide gets into your circulation. Refined sugar does do that. You can inject normal healthy people with lipopolysaccharide or placebo, which is saline, and it causes massive inflammation. Okay, like what I just talked about with a sugar-sweetened beverage. And those people then end up getting depressive symptoms. So it plays a role in their mood. But if you blunt that inflammatory response with something like EPA, which is a component of omega-3, it's one of the omega-3 fatty acids, it doesn't cause the depressive mood. So inflammation does affect mood. We also know that when you have a high inflammatory state, which I just gave a lot of evidence for in terms of added sugar, it changes the metabolism of tryptophan. Tryptophan is an essential amino acid we get from our diet. It's in proteins. It's a precursor for serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that's involved in cognition, executive function. It's involved in mood. What inflammation does is it causes tryptophan, instead of being converted into serotonin, it causes it to be converted into something called kynurenine, which is involved in inflammation. It's basically your body's going, oh, I'm inflamed, I've got a pathogen. Okay, there's no pathogen. It's actually just added sugar, too much added sugar, right? Constantly. And so your body thinks it's a pathogen, and so it's trying to then make anything it can to activate immune cells to take care of the pathogen, right? But the problem is that it's not a pathogen. So kynurenine helps with that whole activating the immune system. But also what it does is, as it's metabolized, it can form something called quinolinic acid, which is a neurotoxin, and it's also associated with depression. So you're talking about inflammation now affecting, key metabolic processes that are important for cognition, executive function, mood, and dampening those processes, right? So you can immediately have an effect on cognition. I mean, you get like a quick sugar high, but boy, does that go away pretty quick, right? I mean, it's like you immediately start to feel like that sort of.
Yeah, if you wanted to reliably make your mental performance bad, having a donut and a Coke an hour before you were supposed to do something important is probably a pretty good way to do it.
Exactly. It's almost like when you're sick, how you feel, right? You feel foggy, brain foggy, because your inflammation, your immune system's activated.
You've mentioned a couple of times today about leaky gut, permeability. At a high level, what can people do? I've heard the words. I kind of understand what it means. It's kind of in the name. What can people do to rebuild their gut and make it less leaky?
Well, leaky gut is kind of the common word. The real, it's intestinal permeability, and essentially what it is you have tight junctions that are holding your endothelial cells that line your intestine together, and they sort of open up, right, and they allow these LPS and cytokines and stuff to go into your circulation and cause inflammation. Essentially, there's a variety of factors that can increase intestinal permeability. Obviously, there's genetic factors that play as well. People have celiac. I mean, that's a big problem. And Crohn's disease, inflammatory bowel disease, like all those things are sort of chronic issues that do cause intestinal permeability. But generally speaking, an obesogenic diet. So the worst thing you can do is have a diet high in a lot of fats, particularly saturated fat, combined with refined sugar. So think like ice cream, right? Like anything that's really high in saturated fat plus refined sugar, it can cause intestinal permeability. Obesity itself can play a role in that as well. Binge drinking is another one. Chronic stress, so psychological stress, anything like relationship stress, financial stress, emotional stress, work-related. Stress itself, releasing stress hormones causes intestinal permeability. There have been studies on that. They took people that were about to give a presentation when you're stressed. In fact, if they would have measured mine before the podcast, they would have been like, oh, she's got intestinal permeability, got the corticotropin releasing hormone, but stress also does it. So really, again, it comes down to fiber plays an important role in preventing intestinal permeability for a couple of reasons. One, 70% of the energy used by your gut is called butyrate. Butyrate is made from bacteria in your gut by fermenting that fermentable type of fiber I was talking about. So things that are high in pectins, that's a type of fermentable fiber. That would be berries or apples with the skin on it, or inulin, so onions, asparagus, or the mushrooms, so the beta glucans, mushrooms, oats. Basically, eating a lot of fermentable fiber increases butyrate production, really helps keep your gut healthy and prevent intestinal permeability. But I think the main thing really is you want to make sure you're eating whole foods. So fruits, vegetables, lean meats, poultry, fish, like a whole foods diet. Ultra processed food diet increases intestinal permeability. And then you also want to make sure that you're getting that fermentable fiber as well, right? Because you want to give yourself the butyrate production. So those are I think some of the major drivers of preventing intestinal permeability.
Lots of people are going to be hearing about this and have been eating processed foods forever. Everyone has an idea in the back of their mind that when you're faced with the apple and a Twinkie, that the apple's going to be better for you. But some people have been moving through different levels of wealth. Some people have been moving through different levels of convenience. Some people are sort of really understanding their health journey. Other people are on the road so much that they have sort of these limitations. No one's going to be militant about it all of the time. Inevitably, you're going to go to a sports match and what are you going to do? There's you haven't pre-cooked your rice and beef and taken it in with you. So what are the best ways to mitigate the impact of ultra-processed foods, given sort of a typical way that people are going to exist in the world? How much can it be offset?
I mean, I think to answer your question is it kind of goes back to the imperfect avoidance, right? Like you're going to do what you can. And most of the time when you're at home in an environment where you can eat whole foods, do some meal prep on weekends, do what you can to kind of make it more convenient for you to have whole foods, you're going to do that. And then when you're traveling or you're going out to have fun at a stadium or whatever, you're going to live your life and have fun and have the ultra processed foods, right? Because if you're 80% of the time doing it the right way, you're doing good. I think exercise, to really answer your question, it's the forgiver of all sin, most of our sins, basically. So if you are exercising and it is a part of your personal hygiene, you're doing it almost every day to some degree, you are mitigating, so the added sugar component, right? You're getting glucose and bringing it into your muscle. You're improving cognition in so many different ways. Exercise plays a role in improving cognition, not only in the short term, but in the long term. And your, exercise also increases butyrate producing bacteria independent of diet. So exercise is actually a stress on the body, on the brain, on the gut. And it actually very, very transiently causes intestinal permeability. But as an adaptation, like exercise does, it does cardiovascular adaptations, your brain adapts, everything's, adapting. Your gut actually increases the production of butyrate producing bacteria so that the next time you exercise, guess what? You have more butyrate around to like really help the your gut be more robust. So I think that there's like, you could just come up with like every explanation why exercise is going to be beneficial for X, Y, or Z unhealthy thing that you do. And it's going to be like, okay, at the end of the day, I am getting that exercise. I'm really doing a good job.
Is there a particular type of exercise here? I'm going to guess that you're going to tell me it's high intensity again.
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what you're looking for, right? I mean, so if you're looking to build muscle mass and strength and increase testosterone more, we're going to talk about compound lifts, right? Like doing multi-joint compound types of exercises like squats and deadlifts and, rows and overhead presses, shoulder presses, on and on. Like that's going to help you robustly increase your muscle mass, increase your muscle strength, function, and testosterone. Like those are things that are known to affect all those things.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we're talking about improving cognition in the short term, like you want a quick pump, like let's say you want to remember something, then we're talking a high intensity interval training session short. Like you don't want to because you can do an hour long HIIT workout and you're just drained after it, right? But there's studies showing that even like a 10-minute HIIT workout will boost cognition and memory recall. Actually, there was an interesting study where doing 30 minutes of, it wasn't necessarily high intensity, but you're like 70% your max heart rate, so you're moderate, getting to the high level, doing that. So learning something and then doing the 30-minute cycling workout and then having a test after, like on your memory recall, it boosts memory recall. So if you really it's a little hack. I use it all the time. I used it today. Like I go through some of my material, do my workout. In my case, I only had 10 minutes, so I did a 10-minute high intensity workout. My favorite is the back-to-back Tabatas. I do 16, intervals. But that's something I use to boost cognition in the short term. But there's just so much data out there on aerobic exercise, high intensity exercise, improving cognition, increasing the number of brain cells in the brain. There was one study, I think I mentioned it last time on the podcast, this was in older adults. They did aerobic exercise for a year. They increased their hippocampus by like 2%. Usually they're atrophying. Okay, they increase the size of it by 2%. Amazing. Mm-hmm. So I do think like, yes, if you're someone who likes to gain muscle, yeah, exactly. You wanna gain muscle. Great. Resistance training is good for the brain too, and there are studies on that as well. But if you want to really have brain benefits and really you want to have your cardiorespiratory fitness improved, you have to add in some aerobic exercise in there. The most time efficient way to do it would be HIIT, because let's say you're like, I'm not going to go run 10 miles a week. Like I'm going to be lifting weights. I only have so much time in the day, right? That's where the high intensity interval training comes in, because it's very time efficient, right? Mm-hmm. Not only that, when you're getting into that high intensity, vigorous exercise type of workout, that's when you're making a metabolite called lactate. We've talked about this. When your body's working so hard that it has to use glucose without using it through the mitochondria. Basically, it's like you don't need oxygen. You can't get oxygen to your mitochondria quick enough to use glucose, and so you're making energy without the mitochondria, and that makes lactate as a byproduct. Turns out it's not a byproduct; it's an active metabolite that's like amazing, and it's getting into the brain. It's been shown to increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, right? That's very important neurotrophic factor that can improve short-term memory, long-term memory. It staves off brain aging. It makes you feel better. It's involved with like neuroplasticity, being able to adapt to changing. I mean, it goes on and on. Like you can't, like you want this stuff, right? And so lactase out there, it's a signaling molecule telling your brain to make it. It's an adaptation because your brain is working hard while you're working out. And so your body's making more.
All of the bros that just want to do sets of 8 to 14 are going, I need to sign up to Barry's boot camp. I'm going to be sweaty. I'm going to have to do all of this work. But you convinced me last year, and I've been doing the Norwegian 4x4 as much as I can remember and as much as I can tolerate since then.
And that's a really good workout for cardiorespiratory fitness, right? Improving your VO2 max, which is really important for longevity, right? That's a big longevity marker. I mean, if you just think about like sitting here talking, having this conversation, it requires an amount of oxygen to like breathe in and be able to utilize, right? As we get older, like even that becomes hard. So you really want to have a high level. You want to like build it up as much as you can because you're going to be pulling on it and going down as you age, right? Things like walking to your car. Have you ever seen like an older person out of breath just by like walking to their car, right? So VO2 max, Norwegian 4x4. So this is 4 minutes of like the maximal intensity that you can sustain for that 4 minutes. This is sustainable intensity. And then you have a 3-minute recovery, total light exercise, and then you go back at it again and you do that 4 times.
Assault bike. After a year of testing, I've come to believe that the assault bike is the best place to do it.
It's actually, it assaults you. Like it's so hard. I know. Like, it's
well, the reason I say assault bike is that with this, what you need is to be able to go very slowly, very easily. So you don't want something you need to strap into or strap out of. So a rowing machine is kind of a little bit ungainly when you've then got to go slow. The same, I guess a skier you can pick up and put down quite easily. But running on a true form, speeding up, slowing down in that way is just so difficult. And doing it on a static bike, a Carol bike or something else, fantastic. But you do have to work a little bit harder because it's just the lower half of your body.
Right.
So my preference is bike. Carol bike, great. Assault bike, kind of easier to be harder, if that makes sense.
It does.
But yeah, I've tried.
I agree. I think the bike. Well, I actually think the bike is harder. When I do the rower, on my 3 minutes off, I actually just end up like not really doing anything because I switch off with my husband and he'll be on. So it's like I actually get 4 minutes off sometimes. But yeah, but it does improve cognition in the brain. That's another, there's some research on that as well, where like at least if you're being time efficient, and it doesn't have to be the Norwegian 4x4. Like you could do a minute on, a minute off, do that 10 times, or you could do Tabatas, right? 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. All of these protocols have been shown to improve VO2 max. They've been shown to improve cognition, also like mitochondrial function. So yeah, Norwegian 4x4, you're going to get a little bit more of a boost because it is a longer interval, but you have to do something that you're going to consistently do, right?
I've found the 4x4 to be quite easy to stick to. It's definitely miserable because 4 minutes is a very long time at a high intensity. But there's a bit of me when I'm doing 20 on, 10 off Tabata, unless it's a really demanding movement, that just thinks I can't work hard enough. I can't sprint fast enough in this 20-second period, and I can't recover enough in the 10 seconds to that cadence for me. Maybe it's just a psychological thing. That cadence doesn't quite seem to work in the same way.
I get it. So when I'm really time strapped, I do my Tabata, which is a 10-minute one, and I agree. I typically crank up the resistance and stand while I'm doing it because I really have to get my heart rate up. I don't find that 10 seconds is enough recovery, so my performance goes down on subsequent intervals for sure. But I do find when I do a 20-minute HIIT workout, so I have 20 seconds on, 20 seconds off, and then I have a little bit of time in between my, sets.
Stations or whatever.
Right. So I find that my performance goes up because I have a little bit more recovery time. And that I really do like that 20 second on, 20 second off. 20-minute workout is kind of like a go-to if it's
good
like
sweet spot.
It is because, like you said, it's like the 10-second recovery is it's just not enough. And I do notice that my next 5 intervals are not as hard.
Sucking on water, trying to get it to go through. What are you working on next? What else have you got in terms of a research area? What are you going to be focused on for the rest of the year?
I'm looking into creatine and its effects on the brain and, obviously muscle, but like I would say popular effects. It's a very interesting, there's a lot of interesting data out there on creatine and also how it affects the methylation pathway. So a lot of people are sort of obsessed with this. Methylation is used in your body for a lot of different biological systems. And a lot of people think of methylfolate. Well, I need my methylfolate because I have an MTHFR where I'm not making methyl groups as much and this and that. Well, actually, our body makes creatine. And, that's something that we do make. But it requires a ton of methylation to do so. So if you give yourself exogenous creatine, it frees up the methylation because your body has the creatine now and it doesn't have to keep making as much. And so I'm very interested in the effects of creatine. No one's talked about that.
Very cool.
But
I think Tim Ferriss is currently, he has been practicing trialing 10 to 15 plus grams a day to see what that does from a cognitive health perspective. It's an interesting
one. There's some interesting data on there, like 10 grams a day. I take 5, but there's also studies on there, studies that have come out on 5 grams a day for like cardiovascular health improvements. So again, I'm actually having a researcher on my podcast, and let's see, about a couple weeks who does creatine research and knows all about that. The other thing I'm very interested in is exercise and cancer, both prevention and treatment. So there's now a lot of clinical research on using exercise as an adjunct treatment to cancer and how effective it is in improving cancer survival, improving, basically lowering the cancer recurrence risk, right? So like it coming back, and also improving like a whole host of like side effects of chemo, like your mood, nausea. Like, guess what? When you exercise along with the chemo, people think I don't have energy to do it, but it turns out they actually feel better. Big surprise to those of us that exercise. It's not that much of a surprise. I mean, exercise is, there's studies out there now that have compared exercise to like classical SSRIs, right? And they're as good, if not better, at treating depression.
Did you see
SSRIs.
What the top rated category of exercise movement was in one of those studies? It was dancing with music.
Oh, no, I didn't see that.
Yeah, so I think it came out at the same time, but it wasn't the same one. But yes, when you compared it and they then ranked all of the different modes of exercise, I think one of the things, especially to do with dancing, that you have is this sort of inherently pro-social, intimate, collaborative, partner-based thing that's going on, which is probably doing all sorts of stuff that's oxytocin, it's serotonin as well,
endorphins,
vasopressin, like there'll be a ton of things going on.
Right. That must have been an observational study. There's actually been randomized controlled trials comparing. A lot of them are running. They do running for the exercise or biking. But like in that sense, it's like you're really comparing the two, right? And in that sense. But yeah, there's so many things going on, right? You're getting the endorphins, you're getting the cannabinoids are another one that you're making with exercise that affect your mood. You're getting serotonin, oxytocin as well from
all
exercise.
The good things.
Yeah.
Rhonda, you're great. I really appreciate you. I love getting to speak to you. So creatine, exercise and cancer. We need to talk about toxic mold and mycotoxins. We can do that next time that you come on. But where should people go? Keep up to date with all of the things. Have you got any more PDFs going out?
I do. Yeah. I've got a podcast, right? I'm on all the places, Spotify and YouTube and Apple Podcasts, but I also have a website as well, foundmyfitness.com. My podcast is called Found My Fitness. And I've got some free reports out there. I've got a new one it's called How to Train According to the Experts. And you can find that at howtotrainguide.com. And it's essentially like all the experts I've had on my podcast that are, in exercise physiology. So it's how to train to improve VO2 max. It includes protocols, how to train to improve muscle mass, muscle strength, how to improve body composition. So there's all the protocols that you need and sort of a lot of like science explanations as well. Howtotrainguide.com. I've got BDNF protocols, so that can be found.
I downloaded that one straight after our episode last year. Where can people get the BDNF one?
BDNFprotocols.com, and that's a lot of protocols for improving brain health and cognition. Basically, if you want some exercise protocols or polyphenol protocols that are out there that are shown to increase cognition, improve cognition. That's another one as well. Oh, and I have another one that you might be interested in. It's the omega-3, how to choose an omega-3 supplement. And it's basically got a list of like 8 or 10 different supplements that are like quality, low oxidation, and like how to choose a supplement. And that's at omega3guide.com. So that's another one.
Okay. People can go and PDF themselves up. Rhonda, I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Appreciate it too, Chris. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for tuning in. Your brain may have exploded with all of the facts and studies that Rhonda's just dropped, but let me explode your brain even more with 3 hours with Andrew Huberman. Right here. Come on. Watch it.